So let's now give an example, right? We spoke in the last segment about this leaked memo. Thanks to Mother Jones, we learned about this memo in which the Kremlin is directing Russian media outlets to use segments of Tucker Carlson's program because it's absolutely great for them in their goal of justifying the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So now Russian state media is being directed by the Kremlin. Use clips of Tucker Carlson. They're doing it. They love it. Okay. Here is a new sequence of clips from Tucker Carlson's program. I believe this was Friday night, going into the weekend. Tucker Carlson jumped right into these now debunked claims about so-called biolabs in Ukraine. And Tucker goes right into Joe Biden is funding secret biolabs in Ukraine and conducting experiments on highly dangerous pathogens. Let's take a look at the clip.
Last night, we told you that the Biden administration is funding a number of secretive biolabs in Ukraine, labs that are conducting experiments on highly dangerous pathogens. Now, that's not a story, as we told you, that we wanted to do. In fact, we didn't think it could be true. It's so over the top and bizarre. And in any case, the administration had repeatedly and very aggressively denied that they were doing anything like this. And then they attacked anyone who asked questions about it as a tool of Russia. We foolishly assumed that in this one instance, they might be telling the truth.
So these claims have been widely pushed by Russian media. This is like a straight up Russian propaganda story. Tulsi Gabbard fell for it. We're going to talk about that later in the show. And it has really worked to shift the narrative onto something that is not only a distraction, it's also untrue. The United States has worked with Ukrainian labs and labs in all different parts of Europe and around the world on all sorts of public health research, which sometimes includes research on pathogens. This is not like really a big deal. There's no conspiracy. It's not hidden. It's not unusual. It's not secret. The New York Times has a good article on this, and the right is just loving spreading this propaganda. There are biological laboratories in Ukraine. They've been around nearly 20 years. And much like the U.S. has done to all sorts of institutions around the world, the U.S. has provided some funding to a number of institutions with the goal of researching pathogens, preventing the production of biological weapons, or knowing how to respond to a potential bioweapons attack, etc. The story that Tucker Carlson and the Fox News milieu and others have misleadingly pushed is based on some remarks from American officials that were misinterpreted as proof that the labs are producing biological weapons or conducting research on biological weapons. There is no proof of that, and the U.S. is certainly not running these labs anyway. So later in the segment, Tucker Carlson, he probably knows that the claim that he made is pretty flimsy. He moves the goalposts and he ends his monologue sort of implying that even if it's just research on pathogens, it's by its nature suspicious. It started about being, bioweapons and weaponized, all this stuff. So then it's just, well, even if they're just researching deadly pathogens, that's suspicious too.
In fact, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev has acknowledged joint American and Ukrainian research on other pathogens, such as hemorrhagic fever virus. Apparently, there's a lot of this going on in Ukraine, funded by the United States. Did you know that? Why Ukraine? We don't know. We can only guess.
Now, by their own stories about the COVID pathogen research labs, remember the whole Wuhan lab story? That's where it came from. It was developed there. COVID escaped or was released or whatever. By their own claims about that, you would think they would realize, well, research into pathogens isn't suspicious in and of itself, and it's certainly not unique to Ukraine. They're the ones who have been saying it's going on in Wuhan. And then the sort of like cherry on top with this Tucker story is he brings on Glenn Greenwald, who kind of like a former leftist, kind of now just a reactionary. Tucker brings on Glenn Greenwald as an expert on detecting deception. I mean, I don't know about that. And Glenn Greenwald echoes Tucker Carlson's completely distorted claims about the biolabs. Take a look.
Last question, maybe you don't know the answer, but why Ukraine? You know, of all the countries you would conduct this kind of research in, you would pick one with like a solid medical infrastructure. You'd pick Germany or Israel or someplace with, you know, first-class scientific research going on. You would not pick Ukraine. Why Ukraine?
Unless you viewed Russia as your primary threat, unless you wanted to be provocative toward the Russians, unless you wanted to be in Ukraine developing all sorts of weapons, as we clearly have been. We've been flooding that country with lethal arms for 5 or 6 years. So clearly there's an intention for the United States to be heavily involved in Ukraine. The Russians say their motive is to be threatening and provocative. The United States denies that. But they have their tentacles in Ukraine and have for many years all the time, which is a critical part of the narrative that has been lacking.
That's right. It's fair to ask, what have they been doing in Ukraine? Why are all their kids working for Ukrainian companies? What is going on here? Glenn Greenwald, I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Now, of course, Tucker asks why Ukraine. And the reality is they're only talking about Ukraine. And this is actual Russian propaganda. Maria Zakharova, spokeswoman for Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I mean, quite literally a Russian propagandist, said on March 8th, Ukraine has been concealing traces of a military biological program supported by U.S. DoD. The truth is, there are 59 labs around the world that handle deadly pathogens as of a few months ago. And the United States, the U.S., as part of a consortium, which we'll later talk about, sometimes funds research that goes on at these labs. There's nothing unique or special about what's going on in Ukraine. And remember that a biolab and a bioweapons lab are two very different things. And the story muddles the two, makes debunked claims about operational agreements and funding and all these different things. And in the end, it's all meant to run interference for Putin. And it doesn't change the fact that Putin chose to invade Ukraine. We'll have some of these clips, if you've just been listening, on our Instagram at David Pakman Show. We'll take a quick break and be right back. One of our sponsors is called Privacy. Privacy is a totally free service that I've been using for years. Privacy lets me create virtual payment cards with one click. And when I use the virtual card, the money is taken out of my bank account. You can create multiple cards, delete them, freeze them, set a spending limit on them. Let's say I'm signing up for a free trial and it requires a credit card. Privacy will autofill a virtual card number, and then after signing up, I can delete that virtual card. So I know I'm not going to be charged again. Something really useful and very practical. Or let's say I'm ordering food over the phone, but I left my wallet somewhere. I don't have my real credit card on me. I can use a virtual card on my Privacy mobile app. But really the best part is you're not out there exposing your real credit card number, so you're not as susceptible to data breaches and identity theft. Privacy is a totally free service, and you'll get $5 to spend when you go to privacy.com/Pakman. The link is right underneath this video.